Chilling tales for dark nights.
The Pill Mills. Written by Scott Wilson. Performed here by Jason Hill. Chapter 9. I sat near an outdoors auditorium that bordered a small dock. There were rows of old rotted wood making benches for the crappy reggae bands that sometimes played on the weekends. More normally, the homeless used the covered stage as a home for a particularly large group that congregated during the nights. As the boats began to pull into the docks to be towed away by SUVs and trucks, the hobos began to appear, cautiously at first, as if worried the sight of people with money might bring some kind of threat. Slowly, but surely, a small group of 7 began to move to the auditorium, with most laying on the ground and 2 men watching the seawall and coast carefully, as if waiting to see something. After some time, a pair of headlights and a deep burble alerted me to a Dodge Challenger, a dark purple car I had seen Dave drive at least once before. He pulled into the small parking lot, looked at the homeless and motioned for me to come to him. I began walking to him and felt one of my legs shake a little, but he had a pleasant and relaxed smile on his face. He was wearing a light green shirt and dark sunglasses with orange plaid shorts. As I got closer, 2 massive men got out of the car. One wore a lavender-colored shirt with dark black letters spelling the name of some brand. The other, just a white tank top and black denim shorts, assumedly to show as many tattoos as possible. Both were covered in tattoos, many such as an 88 on the forehead of one and the letters HH and a shamrock on the neck of the other, which would let anyone aware of the crime world know that they were ranking members of the Aryan Brotherhood. Let me see your cell phone really quick. I thanked God that I had already deleted all my previous texts and calls other than to him and one to my mother. I handed him the phone and he removed the battery and handed it to one of his associates, who put it in the trunk of the car. It began to occur to me that even with 2 possible sources of backup or new problems on the way, a gunshot to the head would only take a second that I probably didn't have. Dave motioned for me to walk with him, and we began to walk away from the amphitheater parking lot into a large concrete outcropping that jutted from the park on the other side of the dock. It was a small, cross-shaped fishing pier, with 2 side abutments that were often used by the elderly to enjoy the view of the water. Right before the top of this cross, after the 4 sections met, was a pavilion that used to be used as housing by the homeless. But tonight, the entire area, and the shuffleboard court in front of it, was empty. Dave and the men were completely silent as we walked towards what felt an awful lot like my doom. So, how's everything going in American? I tried to make small talk, but my voice cracked as we got to the shuffleboard courts in front of the pier. Relax. We'll talk in a second. He had a friendly ring in his voice, but there was a curtness behind it that confirmed my suspicions. We walked past the shuffleboards with the 2 men suddenly much closer, behind me on either side. I knew I had nowhere to run. We turned the corner and in front of the pavilion where the homeless used to sleep, between 2 badly dimmed lights, Chris sat on the ground, watching us. He wore a white t-shirt with white pants, but I couldn't see the details in the dark. Something dark spread around his neck and the front of his shirt. A pair of shoes was just off to his right. What I could see was the brightly colored mask in his hands. He slowly moved the mask to his face, where it stayed seemingly without anything to hang over his ears or the back of his head to keep it there. What looked like a pile of smeared gore sat on top of the pavilion, hanging just slightly in view from behind a roof turret. He stood up in a single fluid movement, and I felt a hand on my shoulder from one of the men, stopping me from moving back. Chris began to walk, slowly but confidently towards us with what appeared to be a beautiful, translucent light green mask that seemed to be some kind of bird. I could still see the features of his face through it, but I noticed he looked absurdly slender after he stood up. His clothes hung off him like a sail. He was walking towards us steadily, his bare feet not moving slower or faster than a casual walk. "Hey, we're gonna need you to head out, buddy. Sorry, but we're gonna need this area." Dave said this quickly and turned around to face me and his friends. He scowled angrily. I doubted he liked being seen with me at the time, but before he could turn around to say something else, he noticed the odd look on his friend's face as Chris moved closer. "Let's just go to the other pier," the skinhead in the tank top growled to Dave. "Shit." Yeah. The other skinhead sounded disappointed. Dave looked at me with deep consideration. "The fuck is he doing anyways?" Dave turned around to see what the two were staring at, only to see Chris within about 10 yards. What looked like a mask seemed to be melting into his skin. I could hear a faint ripping sound coming from him. At first, I thought it was from his mask, but he doubled over involuntarily and it became clear that Chris's entire body was making horrible cracking and gurgling noises. Blood poured down his neck as the edges of the mask seemed to eat into his skin. All at once, 100 small changes seemed to work together, starting and finishing in slightly more than the blink of an eye. His jet black skin was becoming mottled, like a plucked chicken, but stayed its dark hue. Tears in his skin were visible here and there as it stretched to cover what seemed like much longer arms, showing bones and viscera. His eyes were still visible, but the skin around them was stretched and moving. His eyes were larger than they should have been, massive orbs that seemed to move slightly away from each other. His knees snapped and popped with horrific sound, bending backwards. The flesh underneath his mask where his nose had been emitted a sickening wet crack. The beak began to move more gracefully. The three men were stunned, with the skinhead in the lavender shirt staring slack-jawed until Chris's beak opened wide at us, revealing a long, rotted tongue before shrieking. It sounded like metal tearing metal, or a fax machine gone horribly wrong. He began to move faster, walking more like a stork, and I could see that his fingers had giant black hooks at their ends. Taking advantage of the lack of a hand on my shoulder, I jumped to the side, into a small buildup of sand on the fake peninsula. "Fuck!" Dave screamed, taking a small silenced 9mm from a discreet holster on his side and taking aim. An angry snapping sound came from the gun, but what was once Chris leapt at Dave in an enraged, chortling sound before his friends could take out their firearms. Its legs flung the thing at Dave at incredible speed, and all I saw was a bright blur and a sickening, solid-sounding smack as both Dave and Chris hit the ground right where I had been standing, between his friends. Before getting up and running, I saw Dave's two friends bring out their weapons a split second after the long beak that was once a mask land on and poke through Dave's chest as easily as a syringe through the arm. It crouched over him, tearing its beak out of Dave's chest a split second after landing, and bringing a spray of red gore with it. In less than a second, as his friends attempted to save their own lives, I heard a loud bang, or rather felt it. Two blinding flashes of light came from the scene and I looked away. Suddenly, I could only hear ringing and my ears hurt like hell. I got up and in what felt like an eternity, I began to run like hell away from the scene and towards the streetlights of the main road that seemed so far away. A splash of some warm liquid landed on my back and I decided I didn't need to know what it was. I ran as fast as a fat man possibly can run. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move insanely fast towards the fight and prayed whatever it was would delay any surviving skinheads or Chris. My whole torso hurt, but my lungs fought to suck air in and burned worse than any bong hit. I managed to get past the shuffle court and into the parking lot lights in front of the boat ramp, but couldn't see a soul there. I couldn't hear anything other than ringing, but a single bright flash of light behind me let me know it wasn't safe to slow down. I pushed myself as hard as I could and I began to run past the auditorium, thinking the homeless were probably going to do anything they could to not get involved. As I reached the edge of the auditorium, I suddenly hit a hole in the ground and fell. My mouth filled with warm, viscous blood, and I let it simply fall out of my mouth rather than truly spitting. From the parking lot lights, I saw something make a silhouette on the ground coming from behind me, and I struggled to do a push-up for the first time in years to get off the ground and start moving again. Before I could even get all the way up, 2 pairs of bright lights pulled up with an angry roar from a side street connected to the park, and I saw someone get out of the car and point a gun at me. I put my hands up on my knees. My brain couldn't even process what I thought was going to be my death. Instead, there was nothing. I just waited, with 2 headlights and then a flashlight aimed directly at me. The man with a gun was a police officer. Help! I could not hear my voice, but I felt the words falling out of my mouth along with more blood. Later on, I would find out the sound of gunshots had brought an officer who was just getting home from his shift to drive over someone's front lawn and through the wrong way of an alley to get to the sound within seconds. From the blood pouring out of my mouth, he assumed I had something to do with it and called for backup. Detective Juan Roa managed to get there for our appointment just a few minutes later. A tall, dark-haired man with pale olive skin and a youthful mustache who wore a PBSO white polo with dark green pants. He had a surprisingly un-cop-like voice. He was so delighted to hear that I wanted to wear a wire and have constant police surveillance that they completely forgot to do the whole bad cop routine. They brought me to the station, got a doctor to come to us and checked me out, ordering some medianoche sandwiches when the doctor told me I'd only broken 2 teeth on one side and could still eat if I avoided it. I told an officer what I normally text, like with George and Debbie, and he told them that Dave and company never made it to the drop. They were both horrified, but the police can't just arrest someone without anyone finding out, and they only found a few strings of gore, a bit of bone, and some shell casings where the fight happened. So, they were eventually just filed as missing since I declined to mention the stuff about a bird demon. They assumed a fight had broken out among them since I told them I had seen Dave raise a gun to his friend and ran away instead of walking. The next week felt great. My employer suspected a robbery since they were apparently carrying enough to make it worthwhile. They asked me plenty of questions and at times seemed worried, but eventually decided a witch hunt for whoever had robbed them was in order. Debbie and George never really did figure out why I was suddenly less wasted, more focused, and always willing to chat about business until it was too late. I went out in the morning again a couple of weeks after I had a doctor give me enough benzos to sleep through the opiate withdrawals. My tolerance was pretty weak by then. There weren't any kids standing guard by my hotel, but I saw the kid with brown hair near the Publix that separated the city place from Clematis after a short walk. He stared at me inquisitively, but after a few moments seemed to lose interest. He and his friends began to move in a pod towards the Dreyfus School of Arts, a selective high school. After that, I started taking morning walks, slowly, but then more regularly. Plenty of weird shit happened in the clinic, and I usually just kept my head down, but nothing ever bothered me directly again. At least, none of those bird things. I decided to never call Chris again, but I did contact Grace, who will use this account with Jessica later. Some legal changes have occurred in Florida, and at the time I'm writing this, there's a significant chance the pill mills may return in full force. They seem to think a lot of the horrible shit that became common back then might be coming back.
Chilling tales for dark nights.